I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you for listening. Go check out SLEERICKETS.substack.com to listen to The Secret Show, which is an additional episode every week. And a lot, sometimes it's the second half of a longer conversation, or just some weird gossip, or some rabbit hole or other that we've decided to go down that week. They are pretty juicy and entertaining, and people seem to have a lot of fun on there, as well as on the Substack chat. You can join and chime in. I learned from a recent post by Ethan McGuire that there is an interview on YouTube up right now with Alice and Aaron Irwin, friend of the show and talented Brooklyn musician and poet. In addition to being very, very talented and knowledgeable, Aaron is I'm about in the middle of the interview right now. He is so clearly like a deeply good and gentle man that it makes me feel like even more of a hardened piece of shit than I usually do. It's also so nice to hear Alice, not being the interviewer. Like, she is in her own podcast, wonderful, but she often is interviewing someone else and is sort of having to take the reins. It is really nice to see and hear her not be interviewed, but also not talk to an asshole, which is the problem with this podcast, is that the other three co-hosts we're all assholes. So Alice is just as charming and lovely as always. She also talks, I think, pretty insightfully about what it's like to publish a book and what it was like to sort of get into poetry in Australia. She even, as I was having a conversation by text with Elijah, and she answered a question that he had asked me in the middle of the interview. So it's definitely worth going to listen and watch. There's video for that as well. It's a series called Thanks for Dropping By. It's Aaron Irwin's series, and Alice was a special guest from when she was visiting Brooklyn. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it's totally worth checking out. What else? Oh yeah, I still have a book. I still have a book. It's called Midlife. You can go to any number of places, including a link in the show notes, or just SLEERICKETS.com, and you will see a big image for it. And go buy it. I have heard from people. It started arriving in physical form in people's hands, and I've gotten a lot of compliments for my brother, who designed it, along with Rob Griffith did the layout, but Daniel did the visual design, and it's people seem to I think people like it. I've also heard the poems are okay. Go check that out. It's called Midlife. All right, so this week I have I think a fun conversation. This is not really a poetry related one. We do talk a little bit about poetry and the writing life, but it is mostly about a just bananas essay called The Last Messiah, written by an obscure Norwegian philosopher named Peter Wessel Zapfe. He is, I only heard of him because he gets mentioned in Thomas Ligotti's equally insane nonfiction book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. But it is a wild ride. Cameron and I sort of dive into the conversation right from the beginning, and we only kind of back our way into providing some context. So bear with us. Part of what we're getting into at the beginning is that the much of the essay is devoted to Zapfe's description of 4 basic coping mechanisms for dealing with the horror of living as a human being on Earth. I very much enjoyed the essay. I found it hilarious, as I often do with these things. I think it's worth a read, or you can just listen to Cameron and me talk about it. Here is our conversation about Peter Wessel Zapfe's The Last Messiah.
Oh, did I tell you I did like a Matthew Buckley Smith moment in a nightclub on New Year's?
What does that mean? Did people think you were a drug dealer? Because that used to happen to me when I was young. It was because I was so nerdy and out of place.
No. Wait, so they thought you were a drug dealer because you were so nerdy.
I like I would
That's
often like
interesting.
be wearing like a coat when it was a little too warm for that, or and I would like not be
Mm.
dancing, and I sort of have a like I
Oh,
don't
okay.
my face doesn't track normal social exchanges in
Yeah.
quite the right way. So like I'd have people like think I was turning them down, and I was like, no, I really don't have any drugs, but I'm sure some other people here do. I don't. I promise you, I'm not a drug dealer.
So I feel like there's two types of like nerds at the club, right? Like I feel like
Right.
from my experiences, there are people who just are just like they don't really dance and they stand awkwardly. But I think it maybe comes down to clothing more than movement. But I think you can tell with these people that they're not drug dealers. And then there are maybe people more like you. I'm now wondering maybe if it's not exactly because I don't know, did you like not dance at all? Or like did you like try, but it was just kind of you weren't really into it? Or like did you just stand there in like a sort of oversized coat and not
Uh,
track facial expressions?
yeah, probably the last option. I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
probably kind of in that neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, I have danced in my life, but yeah, for the most part, I don't know what to do when I'm in a big loose social setting.
Like I never learned what to like how to dance, but like I get over this by drinking enough that like I have no self-consciousness, which seems to work. I was in a club on New Year's Eve just dancing with some friends, and I think like I had this sort of utterly intense moment of like moral despair where I don't know because it was like everyone around me just seemed like kind of like inanimate masses of flesh,
Yeah,
and life like had there was no purpose or meaning. I'm self-aware enough to see life as having very little purpose or meaning, but it's felt very much like viscerally present in that moment.
yeah,
Um, what does Zephyr call it? Oh, he calls it life panic. Um,
yeah.
but like why I remember this sort of moment of despair more than the others is that like kind of felt ecstatic in a way that I almost want back. Like it felt very intense, and I don't think I've really had very many sort of intense moments like that through my life. So I don't know. It was kind of like a moment of sort of ecstatic despair, which is so very strange to say, but that is
Yeah.
quite why I sort of remember it.
Did it make you think? I know you've in the past said that when you're intoxicated, you don't generally think much about poetry, but did that like I'm wondering
Wait,
if
have,
the
have, have I said that? I don't think that's true.
oh maybe sorry maybe it was that you said like you don't find writing poetry in a state of
Oh
intoxication
yeah,
to be
no, I can't
helpful.
do that. No, I
Yeah,
can't do that.
like for me, I very much recognized what when Zaffa talked about sublimation as the sort of transformation of despair and panic into a will to create something beautiful or truthful. And I think he's right also that like in the process of sublimating your panic and your despair, you at least temporarily sort of escape it.
I don't know because I've such a strange experience with writing, and that like it seems to come to me again, not from an external body, but kind of mystically, that often I can't kind of choose the moment when it comes. So I can't sort of do it. If it just doesn't come while I'm in like a period of despair, it just won't come. And this is like why I think the true artistic impulse isn't at all about like self-expression per se, but about, expressiveness. It's not important that you want to express this despair or whatever. It's important that you want to build a kind of structure as a sort of ringing opposition to sort of the formlessness of chaos.
Yeah, well,
Um,
and it's a loophole where
hmm,
you are confronted by the fundamental insurmountable meaninglessness of existence, and then you sort of do a sleight of hand so that the acknowledgement of that meaninglessness becomes a source of meaning, like turning it
yeah,
into
yeah.
art or turning it into. I mean, he says that like as he is writing the essay, he's like, and that is what I am doing right now.
Hmm. It's interesting then because it seems to be at this point that we have to acknowledge that basically shape is meaning, right? Or structure is meaning, which is interesting because I don't think you would immediately say that shape is meaning, or maybe shape or
No.
structure is significant meaning, right?
Yeah. How is structure meaning? How is meaning structure?
In these cases of sublimation, the impulse is not exactly to produce an overwhelming statement that rejects the emotional despair you're going through, to produce something like meaningful and philosophically positive, but the impulse is to produce a structure that, in some sense, gives you a kind of sense of transcendence over the meaningless chaos you're experiencing. And therefore, in this sense, the structure itself is the meaning, right? It's the fact that you
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah, yeah.
form a shape that is meaningful.
Okay,
Um,
okay. So just to provide a little bit of context for this thing we provided no context for,
yeah, we should.
there's this essay called The Last Messiah. I heard of it because I am listening to a nonfiction book by Thomas Ligotti, the horror writer.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, called
yeah.
The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. Have you read it?
Yeah, so I read it, right, but like I got someone to, so I got a CD, right, and I got someone to like copy the files across to an MP3 player, but the thing was all the files got like mixed up. So when I read it, it was like not in order, like all the chapters just like random. So like I read it, it was just like reading through like a fucking collage. Like if we talk about Macbeth, and then like the next paragraph would be like, and then Lovecraft said in this story, and
Oh, it wasn't even like chapter by chapter. It was like
no, well,
paragraph by
like
paragraph.
it was sometimes by chapter, and then sometimes it was just by, yeah, sometimes it was just by paragraph.
Oh
Like
God.
there
All
was
right.
no rhyme or reason.
Okay.
But so
So
I have read
yeah.
it.
Right. In some sense, yeah.
Yeah,
That's like the perfect that's actually the author, that's the director's cut of the book, which all
yeah,
meaning is
yeah.
unachievable. So Ligotti's argument overall is basically like life is like, as he puts it, like the prevailing belief among human beings that being alive is all right. That's how he puts it. That's false. That being alive is not all right. That's kind of his claim, and he elaborates, I think, compellingly on it. But he cites this essay, "The Last Messiah," written by Peter Wessel Zapffe, he was a Norwegian philosopher writer. He published this in 1933, and it's translated by Gisle Tangenes. But this essay is one in which he makes this case that uh, that consciousness is a maladaptation. And I think I was talking to Alice a little bit about this earlier this afternoon. Like the really maybe like for me devastating comparison he makes is to a particular species of deer.
Oh yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
where's let me find. Okay,
Well,
yeah. He says the tragedy of a species becoming unfit for life by over evolving one ability is not confined to humankind. Thus, it is thought, for instance, that certain deer in paleontological times succumbed as they acquired overly heavy horns. So, having big, sharp, powerful horns is an advantage or antlers is an advantage for male deer, but at a certain point, they can get so big that it actually becomes a liability. The mutations must be considered blind. They are thrown forth without any contact of interest with their environment. In depressive states, the mind may be seen in the image of such an antler in all its fantastic splendor, pinning its bearer to the ground. So he says that basically, like to be conscious of our condition is to be driven into a state of panic or despair. And so basically all the time we are using one of four strategies, sometimes more than one of four strategies, in order to avoid this awareness. And he identifies them as isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. We talked a little bit about some of those, but yeah. So I sent this to you because I just found it like provocative, but also sort of hilarious because some of the descriptions are so weird and great. I love those corpses whipping the ground.
oh yeah, that's so funny because it's like what I get what he's talking about, but at the same time, it's like not it's that's not how death happens. It is not like a tsunami of corpses every once in a while. Like it's such a like hilarious, like weird, like George A. Romero like image. It just comes out of
Right.
nowhere.
It's
But
like a rainstorm of corpses just slapping into the earth.
I think like only like maybe me and Alice would find this funny, considering that this podcast is mainly listened to by like middle-aged Catholic men. But I still can't go. But
I don't
like
know if it's
I
amazing.
can't.
I think we have a we have a healthy contingent of middle-aged Catholic
Okay,
men, but
sure,
yeah.
sure, sure, sure. And and women, middle-aged Catholic women as
Right.
well.
Okay, right, yes.
But like, I can't go over the opening like three paragraphs.
Oh yeah,
Do you,
yeah.
do you, do you want to read it?
Sure, yeah. He's kind of imagining the early the dawn of man.
Yeah, like, and if you get this, then like you're one of the elect, and if you don't, then like you're boring. If you find this funny, but yeah, yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
One night in long bygone times, man awoke and saw himself. He saw that he was naked under cosmos, homeless in his own body. All things dissolved before his testing thought. Wonder above wonder, horror above horror, unfolded in his mind. Then woman too awoke and said it was time to go and slay. For you, that like the essay could just end there because
Yeah, it's so funny. Okay, so there's two jokes here.
yeah,
One of them is that like nowadays slay just means like go out and like look really fucking good.
yes,
So that's a joke that I find hilarious. But like I don't know. So like the other joke that like I guess he probably did intend a bit here is like I don't know, kind of like just a weird misogynistic joke about how like I don't know, some man comes to self-consciousness and then like the women are like, you need to like do and get the practical shit. Or like it's like a sort of double-handed, like a sort of backhanded compliment to women, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Men are more
yes,
likely to get lost in abstract
yeah,
thought, and women are more likely
yeah.
to keep their eyes focused on the here and now.
It's kind of it's bullshit, but I guess like it could be worse misogyny, right?
Yeah.
But like I don't
I
know.
think there's probably truth to that in terms of the social
Right.
roles, if nothing. Like setting
Yeah, yeah.
biology aside entirely, like that probably
No,
that has
that's true.
some meaning in terms of social roles.
Oh yeah, it definitely has meaning. It definitely has meaning. Yeah. But no, I just I can't get past the slave thing. But yeah, I think the further I long I read this essay, the more powerful I found it. I think maybe if you come down sort of on the sublimation side of coping, I think I found like I recognize a lot of myself in like the anchoring thing,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I think like I will like definitely measure out a lot of like my time as kind of like hard things I have to go through to get to like fun events. If like fun events, I mean like going and like seeing someone I like really like, right?
Right,
Or
right.
like
Which is a way
really
of
nice people.
assigning meaning to the
Mm.
suffering, right?
And
Like
like,
this
yeah,
like the meaning of this experience that sucks is that later I get to have fun.
yeah. And then obvious it always hits me afterwards. It's like this is meaningless. Like I do the thing, I've had fun, and then like I'm like, well, that was so ephemeral and now it's over and it's pointless. And then like I don't have like I have a few hours of shit, I've forgotten the phrase again. What's the life panic?
Life.
Yeah, yeah. I have like a few hours of life panic, and then I do some more anchoring, and I think, oh well, in a few more days I can do this. So I just have to get through these few days. So I'm locked in this kind of repetition. But yeah, no, going back to the deer horns image, I think it's so wonderful and horrifying. It's wonderful
Yeah,
because it's such a beautiful image, and it's horrifying because, or maybe such an accurate image, and it's horrifying because of the accuracy,
yeah,
the kind of blind, thrusting glory
yeah,
of the horn being related back to consciousness, and how there's something kind of piercing and true in that. And then the more I thought about it, and this could just be me podcasting to you at 3 a.m. in the morning and drinking very cheap rum and coke, but like the more I thought about this metaphor, the more it seemed very phallic. I mean, I don't know, but like I don't know, this sort of thrusting horn does seem to be kind of like I don't know, like a huge thrusting penis.
yeah.
Maybe I just
Yeah.
think about penises too often, but like I don't know, there's
I
something.
mean, it's more like a candelabra of penises, right? Because it's
Yeah,
antlers. It's not a
yeah,
rhinoceros horn. It's
yeah.
many. Yeah,
Split
it's like a
mega
menorah of
penis.
penises. Yeah,
Yeah, but like I don't know, there's something insanely pathetic and maybe slightly glorious in this image that's I think kind of ineffably horrifying and wonderful at the same time, and just kind of sticks to you and it sticks in you like you've been speared by an antler. But yeah, it's very deeply disturbing and maybe radically true.
yeah. It's you said something that I chafed at initially, but then I thought about it more after editing and listening to it again in I can't remember which conversation it was, but I think it was one where we were talking about Harold Bloom a little bit, but you said that when you said that like ranking, that an obsession with ranking, value and greatness is maybe fundamentally masculine. You said maybe it has something to do
Uh-huh.
with a masculine obsession with strength. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I then thought about that, and I think my like pseudo evolutionary psychology Zapfa interpretation is that in at least in the role of like in the masculine role, again, setting biology aside, there is a little more emphasis on direct competition, and in plenty of competition, especially in any kind of martial competition, second place is oblivion. So being like it matters that you're sort of that you come out ahead or on top, or you're bigger, you're better, you're stronger, because like rather than thinking about something subtler and more qualitative and more complex, more holistic, like it matters that you can sort of like rank yourself at the top, because first place is glory and second place is death. And so
Yes, yeah.
I think I think you're probably right that there is something. I mean, obviously the antlers are a sex characteristic in themselves.
Yeah.
And they're literally there for fighting off other bucks so that you can be the one to procreate. So like, and clearly like the development of consciousness was a weapon, like was an advance. Like we put monkeys in cages, they don't put us in cages,
Yeah.
But it also may mean we are crippled. I found like also weirdly like moving and sort of chilling his elaboration on the metaphor when he said, if the giant deer at suitable intervals had broken off the outer spears of its antlers, it might have kept going for some while longer. Yet in fever and constant pain, indeed in betrayal of its central idea, the core of its peculiarity, for it was vocated by creation's hand to be the horn bearer of wild animals. What it gained in continuance, it would lose in significance. And I think like similarly,
right.
he makes a very straight comparison to the mind, saying basically like one way not to have your head weighed down to the ground by consciousness is to deliberately close off your awareness of things, snap off the outer horns of your antlers so that you can lift your head up off the ground.
Yeah, and I think this is terrifying, I think, because it also speaks directly to the to like his philosophical work, right? Because it's like there's utterly no, like, if maybe you can't even take like hope or resolution, or like take as a balm the idea that in your sort of narcissistic philosophical despair, if in your kind of deep thinking about the world and this abyss you've opened up through the power of thought, but there's not even particularly any meaning or power in the strength of your thought to open that abyss. Because if you thought less about that abyss or thought less about the world intensely, then maybe you would prolong, you would live a happier life. So there's not even, you can't even take refuge in the idea that you're, in complete despair, but at least it's because you've got there through such powerful thought, because that powerful thought is as pointless and pain inducing and ultimately limiting as that vast antler that these deers have, right? There's something, this metaphor cuts off all escape routes. There's no way via the road of hope out of this conundrum.
Yeah. It's like I'm constantly fainting and then getting run over by pedestrians because my dick is so big that it sucks up all the blood in my body. It's like, well, at least I'm passing out and getting trampled because my dick is the biggest. Like, it's not really much consolation.
Oh man, who's making dick metaphors now?
What podcast did you think you were on? We should at least like identify somewhat what he means by these four strategies. So we talked a little bit about sublimation, but there's isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation. Isolation, he says, by isolation, I here mean a fully arbitrary dismissal from consciousness of all disturbing and destructive thought and feeling. Just cutting yourself off from having to think about it, sticking your fingers in your ears and saying la la la.
Probably the most effective way.
Yeah. And I recognize the sublimation. For me, I think I probably do versions of all four of these, and to different degrees. Yeah.
I think I'd be suspicious of anyone who says they don't. It's interesting because I think like one of my very close friends has been talking a lot recently about like how she keeps having sort of psychological panics about how she realizes that she just doesn't know what the hell she's going to do with her life, and like it sort of everything kind of collapses and she falls through like a well of non-meaning. And then how she gets rid of this is just by not think like, yeah, not thinking about it. Like I say, what are you gonna, how are you gonna get past it? And she says, she just says, well, don't worry, like in a few days I'll stop thinking about it and I'll be fine. And like I can't really comprehend this way of thinking to such an extent, because certainly I
Right.
do this on a low level, but I
Yeah.
can't do this to such a level that she does,
Right.
because I don't know, I can't control sort of the horrible downward spiral of my sort of racing thoughts like that. But like, yeah, isolation is probably the most effective if if you clamp down, if you develop and clamp down on that skill. Isolation is probably the most effective means
Yeah.
towards living a happy life.
And there are like more and less serious examples of it. I actually thought he was really wonderfully insightful when he said, in everyday interaction, isolation is manifested in a general code of mutual silence, primarily towards like we all agree not to acknowledge this thing. We all agree not to
Right. Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
let on, which is partly like the not letting the conversation drop thing.
Mm.
Primarily toward children. So these are not at once scared senseless by the life they have just begun. You don't want to scare children by talking about death or pain or meaninglessness, but retain their illusions until they can afford to lose them. And then this, I think, was so dead on. He says, in return, children are not to bother the adults with untimely reminders of sex, toilet, or death. It's just very funny, but I think totally right. Like
Yeah,
it's
also
not that
very true.
like there are things kids don't know that adults do know, but there's also like kids loved, especially like my younger daughter's kind of at a phase where like anything scatological or anything having to do with like naked butts or bodies is like hilarious and fascinating to her. And we like those things mean more to us than they do to her. And so we're actually more bothered by them. Like, it's like, let's stop talking about poop right now, please. Like, it's actually
Right.
for my sake that I kind of, like, that's the deal we have going.
And that's interesting, because do you think the reason that she gains comedy from that is because of the avoidance, in that it's such a kind of the sort of the newness of it and the risque of it, the risqueness of it, and the knowledge that she has that it's a subject that should be avoided. Do you think that itself gives it comedy? Is it that she's discovering
Yes.
something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
part. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's probably like certainly in part it's in response to me, but I think it's more broadly like she's recognizing something that is at once true and broadly, politely not acknowledged.
Mm.
And so it's that like
Yeah.
surprise and
Yeah.
recognition. Like my mom was visiting and Ellie said she wanted to play Barbies, and she just walked up to my mom and she held up her Ken doll and then just jerked his pants down and held out this like fleshy stub in front of my grandma and like looked at it and said, "Grandma, look at this." Like I don't even know what she was getting at. It's like, can you believe this?
All
Oh,
right,
the
and
other the
like,
other line I thought you would appreciate, given your philosophy on circle jerks, is she and my other daughter were watching School of Rock, the Jack Black movie, and there's a scene in a men's room. She said, she said, why are boys' bathrooms like that? Do boys just like looking at each other because of all the urinals lined up? It's like I guess that's what you do in a boys'
I
room.
mean, she's not quite wrong. I mean, yeah, again, like this is what's kind of funny about both of these scenes, in that they're not just absurd things that are meaningless. There's something
No, not at
funny,
all.
because they're both very accurate
Totally,
things
yeah, yeah,
in those remarks. It's interesting. I've
yeah.
been thinking a lot about comedy, because for my dissertation on Samuel Beckett, I was reading an essay by the philosopher Henri Bergson called Laughter. Bergson isn't very well remembered now. His sort of big claim to fame is that he had a very long argument with Einstein about how Einstein's theory of general relativity was not exactly wrong, but um, basically irrelevant to the lives of most human beings. I,
Mm.
I asked my friend who does physics about this, and he said that this is a absurd claim. But Bergson has this essay called Laughter, where he describes laugh humor, and he tries to pin down what comedy is. And he gets so many things very right, and then he gets so many things just confusingly and utterly wrong. Like at one point, he says you can't be in a state of heightened emotion if you're going to find things funny. Like humor only applies to the intellect, and if you're like in a state of very heightened emotion, you won't find things very funny. And I was like, bro, have you never been
No.
like very happy or very drunk before? What life
Right.
are you
Or
living?
like at a
Like,
funeral and something funny happens. Yeah.
yeah. Like what's this claim? But yeah,
That's
no, it's
again like that's like the guy trying to like make his system make sense rather than just trying to
right.
describe something. Well, so, since we're just giving people some sense of what Zoph was talking about here, you said that you maybe most identify with the strategy of anchoring. Would you just say a word
I think
about
so.
what that is that he's talking about and what you identify with?
Sure. So in anchoring, he's talking about. Can you find the paragraph where he talks about the whole starting school? But basically, when he discusses anchoring, he's discussing when one goes through an activity, especially when one's a child, and then realizes it's very meaningless, and then sort of experiences a sudden sense of like the meaningless and ephemerality.
Ephemerality.
Yeah, ephemeral. There we go. When he discusses, he's talking mainly about children. He discusses when one experiences a moment of meaninglessness, and then that in that moment one recognizes the meaninglessness and ephemerality. Oh fuck this meaninglessness and sort of short-lived reality of all phenomenological experience.
Yeah.
And so one applies this to life, and then to get past this, one finds events or experiences in the future which one then attaches meaning to and then clings to them as a way to comfort oneself against this sort of sense of effort. No, I still can't do it. Against the to comfort oneself against sort of the meaninglessness and short-lived power of all life experiences.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a way of like establishing, like anchoring is one image for it, and I think another
yeah.
would be Camus talks about absurd walls, and
Mm,
he's talking in part about just like the absurdity of like the physical nature of our existence. Like we happen to be born and die, and we happen to live in this particular place, and but also I think we tend to kind of box off and bracket off our life in order to in part in order to do some anchoring, in order to like make meaningful this stretch of time by calling it like the fiscal year or this school year or you know I mean I for a
that's very
long time
true.
I lived in a bunch of different places, and so I would sort of organize my life by like, oh, when I was living in this place, when I was living in that place, and these sort of units. And the example he gives here is the child saying the child it has a crisis of confusion and anxiety and promptly looks around for another anchoring. In autumn I will attend middle school. If the substitution somehow fails, then the crisis may take a fatal course, or else what I will call an anchoring spasm occurs. One clings to the dead values, concealing as well as possible from oneself and others the fact that they are unworkable, that one is spiritually insolvent, which I think is a great phrase.
Mm. That is a great phrase. I'm not sure the whole middle school thing really works out. Like again, I feel like he's kind of forgotten what children are like. Like I don't really know any child that was like, I'm gonna go to school in
Right.
in September, and that's what's gonna give my life meaning. Like in some sense, it's more like I have a few more months until I don't go to school, and that's what gives my
Yeah,
life
yeah, yeah,
meaning,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, school.
But
Yeah,
no,
yeah. I did think about like my final year of Catholic school when I knew I was going to be going to this very different high school. I did think about like white knuckling
right,
through these,
yeah.
in order to get to this other place. But yeah, like we whether it's a as you said, like you've got a deadline or you've got to like work first, play second, or you say like, well, if I can get done with this project, I'll finally then like the weight will be lifted, and then I'll be free, and we'll be at the weekend, and then I'll be
Yeah,
happy. And it like
yeah.
it provides meaning on both ends. Like it makes the suffering beforehand meaningful, and it also sort of loads up the weekend or the summer or the free period with with the meaning by virtue of like having your suffering relieved.
And he takes this further, doesn't he? He applies this to sort of religion itself, doesn't he? If I'm not
Oh, I
wrong.
mean, yeah,
Mm,
I think so. He says, okay, all right, here, yeah. I think this is what you're talking about. Any culture is a great rounded system of anchorings built on foundational firmaments, the basic cultural ideas. The average person makes do with the collective firmaments. The personality is building for himself. The person of character has finished his construction, more or less grounded on the inherited collective main firmaments: God, the church, the state, morality, fate, the law of life, the people, the future. The closer to main, this is key. The closer to main firmaments a certain carrying element is, the more perilous it is to touch. Here, a direct protection is normally established by means of penal codes and threats of prosecution, inquisition, censorship, the conservative approach to life. And there's an example he gives that I talked to Alice about, because so she has an episode about a Les Murray poem where the whole poem is about the spectacle of this man weeping in public. And
Oh, I love that poem. Yeah, that's a lovely poem.
An ordinary rainbow, something like that. But yeah, he says like an example of somebody threatening these like larger civic anchors is a man weeping on the street, and like the natural response to that is like, well, the police are going to come escort him away.
Yeah,
and it's because he's threatening the premise that being alive is all right. Like
obviously, I can't agree with Ligotti because I'm with my friend Nietzsche, so I can't join the anti-naturalists. But
it's a fascinatingly anti-Nietzschean book.
Yeah, but it's also it couldn't exist without Nietzsche. Like Nietzsche's whole, Nietzsche's like one of the things about man is like he's the animal. Is it he's the animal who's guilty, or he's the animal who has like self-consciousness? What does Nietzsche say about man being like the animal that, or is it like he's the animal who keeps his promises? I can't remember. Nietzsche has many comments about man's the animal or something. But like, I don't think Ligotti can exist without Nietzsche's sort of recognition of like the self-consciousness of man, and yet takes against the Nietzschean standpoint in a classic example of the anxiety of influence. Or so would say Harold Bloom, but not me.
His term for people like Nietzsche is he calls them heroic pessimists. And he's I mean, which is I think acknowledging some legitimate intellectual heroism, but also there's the sort of the sneering implication is you come right up to the brink, you sort of acknowledge the total horror of existence, and then you say, well, anyway, let's do this. And then sort of, which is sort of what Camus does at the end of the Myth of Sisyphus. Go ahead. Do you want to talk about this? The other two are distraction and sublimation.
Oh, sure. I was going to say on the whole sort of Nietzsche side tangent that I've been having sort of terrifying moments where I've been sort of considering my life as an aesthetic act, because this is one of Nietzsche's central teachings, that one should, in the absence of God, maybe appreciate life as an aesthetic experience. And I've been watching a lot of comedies recently, and I keep sort of having psychological moments where I imagine my life as a kind of comedy or a sitcom. And like, I find this very terrifying, really, when I realize I'm doing this, because one, like, what type of audience am I playing to? Like, what metaphysical, probably made up audience is watching this strange comedy starring me? And two, I feel like once I sort of turn my life into a aesthetic genre, a comedy is like an aesthetic experience based on certain rules and regulations that mark out it as a genre, right? Once I turn my life into that, it sort of denatures experience because it forces it towards one certain camp of perspective that then renders other experiences meaningless. And that I find kind of scary, that like to see my life as a comedy is to force my life into one certain sort of parameter or perspective, which causes parts of life to become kind of not just meaningless, but kind of alien to how I expect life to be. So I don't know. I've come to kind of question the whole idea of life as an aesthetic act. I find it. I'm not sure I'm against it, but it's hard to completely praise, I think.
I definitely am with you there. I think considering your life as an aesthetic act or an aesthetic event or an aesthetic whatever is maybe how I define romanticism in its kind of purest, most self-indulgent form. And I do a Heideggerian sleight of hand and pretend that the root of romanticism is roman, as in like the novel, that you're calling your life a novel. Because I do think that because that's the anchoring trick, which is in a classical outlook, what's good is what's obviously good, and you want the sun and strength, and you want to be a victor, and you want to win the girl, and you want to be beautiful, and you want to have the treasure. But in a romance, you can have horrible failure and suffering. And if it were just in a big, bleak, empty universe, there would be no consolation for it. But if it's in a book, then that can make it good. right? Like books,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
conflict is what makes books interesting. And so if your life is a novel, then all of the suffering and conflict and loss and failure in your life is now suddenly charged with meaning and interest.
But it comes back to sort of structure versus chaos, right? In that, like, if one experiences a life that's sort of a chaotic set of events with no sort of structuring, symmetrical principle, then by the kind of chaotic backdrop, those events slip into meaninglessness because they're just sort of a wide spray of paint against sort of a
Yeah.
blank canvas. But if one experiences life as a kind of aesthetic act, or, as a genre, a novel or a comedy, then, as Dickinson says, one's life becomes sort of shaven and fitted to a frame. And the
Yes.
shaven part here is a particularly useful thing to think about because some acts have to be shaven off from meaning because they don't fit with the particular frame you consider your life to be fitted to.
Right.
And that becomes alienating because you become alienated from some experiences. And life
Yeah. Yeah.
takes on this sort of terrifying, acceptable and unacceptable sort of range that you live between.
Yeah. All of the things and people and experiences in your life become mise en scène or scène, however you say that. And like they all have to be, just as with like set dressing, it has to be there for a reason. It has to be there.
Yeah.
It can't be
Yeah.
there by accident.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably both. I think like probably both the classical and romantic worldviews involve some anchoring maneuvers, but it may just be a question of like where you're setting the boundaries of the anchoring.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
yeah, yeah. I
That's
mean,
true.
the second two
Oh, can
tactic.
you can you
Oh,
can you
sorry. Yeah.
define? I'm just gonna go to the toilet. Can you like define one of them, and then I'll come back and join you on the last one.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure thing. So a very popular mode of protection is distraction. This is, I think, mostly self-explanatory, but I think he does highlight some provocative aspects of this strategy. One limits attention to the critical bounds by constantly enthralling it with impressions. So, sensations, experiences, new tastes, new sounds, new delights, new, even, masochistic delights. This is typical even in childhood without distraction. And this gets actually back to that old question of boredom and maybe why boredom has a slightly different function in childhood than it has in adulthood. And I think it's largely because children just don't have as much control over how their lives are arranged. This is typical even in childhood. Without distraction, the child is also insufferable to itself. Mom, what am I to do? I'm bored. I'm bored. He goes on. A little English girl visiting her Norwegian aunts came inside from her room saying, "What happens now?" This is like a classic little kid question. The nurses attain virtuosity. Look, a doggy. Watch, they are painting the palace. This is the opposite of my impulse. My impulse is as we've discussed before, to say, I don't know, you figure it out. Zapfa's nurses are more helpful. They say, look a doggy. Watch, they are painting the palace. Here are some sensations, essentially. Like here are some new impressions with which to enthrall your mind, so that you don't have to think about being. Zapfa goes on. The phenomenon is too familiar to require any further demonstration. Distraction is, for example, the high society's tactic for living. It can be likened to a flying machine made of heavy material, but embodying a principle that keeps it airborne whenever applying. It must always be in motion, as air only carries it fleetingly. He then he has to throw in the note: women in general less cognition prone and hence more secure in living than men, preferably use distraction. So that's women turn to distraction while men maybe turn to anchoring, and Safa's claim. What came to my mind though was the liberal arts. So the again possibly apocryphal explanation I got for why the liberal arts are called the liberal arts is that they are the things that the skills one learns, right? Art is skill. And if you are a peasant or an apprentice or a soldier, you know what skills you need to learn. But if you are a free man, if you don't have to work to feed yourself, to provide for your family, if you are landed gentry, if you're born wealthy and free, you can spend your time however you like, then you have to come up with some pretty good distractions. And these might even extend to, for thoughtful people, for people with some mental resources, merely looking at a bear baiting match might not be entertaining enough. You need literature, you need music, you need science, you need math, you need all of the the arts that we are able to devote ourselves to when we no longer need to make money, which is, you know, one of the many reasons that college is a wonderful convention that just makes very little sense as a way to prepare people to being employed. The final example.
Oh, just
Oh
before
yeah.
we
Oh
before
yeah,
we
yeah.
go
Go
into
ahead.
that,
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just wondering, do you think this example is kind of badly named? Like distraction.
Distraction.
Do you think, yeah, this category is kind of badly named? Because like all of them are distraction systems, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think you're right, and I think there may be part of his problem may be that he's also slightly misnamed isolation.
yeah,
Like I would
yeah,
say, like
that's
isolation might be better termed denial.
yes.
Um,
Yes. And I think also distraction and anchoring, there's certainly a kind of Venn diagram where those two cross over, I think.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And distraction is like in a way, anchoring is like diversion, where you're, you
Yeah.
know, distraction is tearing apart, which again is not quite right. Like distraction as he's describing it, which is overwhelming yourself with new impressions and sensations, and oh, let me get some, you know, a hit of nicotine. Let me watch a fun movie. Let me eat some chocolate. Let me get some, you know, stimulate myself. Here's some pornography.
Doesn't that,
Like,
I think that seems like diversion, doesn't it? I think distraction in here is kind of diversion.
yeah, I mean, maybe diversion is one way to. I was thinking of it as like flooding. Like a friend,
Mm,
and I'll leave it vague because yeah, I'll leave it vague because it's medical, but
mhm.
he has a very rare autoimmune condition where his blood attacks his myelin, like his white blood cells attack the myelin sheaths on his nerves. It's the same thing that happens in MS, but different sets of nerves, and it can be debilitating. But the treatment is that he gets donor blood, you know, like filtered and sort of only certain parts of it, regularly infused or transfused into his body. And the way it works is not that like the donor blood has good stuff, and it's not that his blood gets taken out of his body. It's that by flooding his body with this donor blood, it keeps his body from realizing that it needs to start making more white blood cells. Like there's two.
That
It's
is,
like there's more. There's
yeah.
like enough stuff here that like the empty light doesn't ding on in the for the gas tank, right? So you never it doesn't never notices that it needs to start pumping out these, you know, parasitic or not parasitic but self-destructive cells.
So
It seems something like
maybe
that, like flooding or yeah.
saturation,
Saturation actually
saturate.
is not a bad
Yeah.
way to, yeah, I think saturation might be good. Like you are already too full of sensations to be able to think about anything else.
Yeah, because I think I might call anchoring maybe like investment or charging. I think
Yeah.
this seems to be like you come across an event and you kind of supercharge that with a certain specific meaning, or you invest that meaning into that event or that thing or that concept or that activity. Um, and
Yeah.
that is how you sort of anchor yourself to a temporarily healthy existence.
Right. But like it's funny because anchoring is the image that comes to mind, of course, is a ship throwing down an anchor in order to stand still,
Hmm.
but it may
Yeah.
almost be more like towing. Like it's not that you're standing still, it's like you're
Yes.
like you're hitching your wagon to something.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
like
You're being
whether it's a
dragged
weight
towards
or it's,
something.
yeah, like you're rather than having the movement just be wild and meaningless, you're
Mm.
attaching it to something so that it's given purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the
Or
yeah, language is probably not quite right, but I think yeah, so if we were to say like denial, what did you call it, investment, or
yeah,
charging,
investment
something
or
like this,
charging.
yeah, and
Although I do
then
like your towing. That's
yeah,
also
towing is so like it's not probably not like a tidy term for that, but tugging is
no, but I
also
like the
not good.
movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
And then saturation I think is probably better than distraction. I mean, distraction is probably the word
Hmm.
we use today colloquially to mean this, but just, you know, like often when we say distraction today, what we mean is diversion. Like it's not to
Yeah,
tear
yeah.
apart your attention, but rather to channel it into something else.
Hmm.
And then the final remedy, the fourth remedy against panic, sublimation, is a matter of transformation rather than repression. Through stylistic or artistic gifts, can the very pain of living at times be converted into valuable experiences? This is, I think, again, like as with a lot of these, there are probably degrees of anchoring or whatever you want to call that in it. Like it's not. I don't know that any one of these is like a totally pure independent strategy, but it may be that there's a different emphasis here than in some of the other places where you're not denying the pain and you're not looking at something else instead, and you're not giving it meaning by attaching it to another consequence or another framework. You are rather, the acknowledgement and identification of it becomes a source of meaning in itself. I wonder, though, to me, something feels like slightly too loophole-ish about this. Like it seems like it sort of only applies to like art and philosophy in a weird way. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it seems to apply to art and philosophy, and in some sense maybe it's kind of not elitist, but certainly the least common and most rarefied of the categories. Certainly there's a kind of bias towards this one than the others. Maybe that like
Yeah.
there's a sort of sense that this one is more not truthful per se, but maybe more productive or more divinified, if we can strip that.
Yeah, or less dishonest by being,
Yeah,
he says the present essay is a typical attempt at sublimation. The author does not suffer. He is filling pages and is going to be published in a journal.
Right. Which is, I think it's also maybe the most pathetic and yet grandiose of the four categories.
Yeah.
Going back to my friend, I mean, like when my friend says, I have no idea what I'm going to do in my life, I always think, well, neither do I, but I know that I know the purpose of my life, and the purpose of my life is to write good things.
Yes.
And then once I die, what my life in all its horror and meaninglessness will have served in a lesser capacity to produce greater things, which are the things I've made out of words, right? And this is maybe just an utter illusion to just keep me going, but this is kind of my version of sublimation. And I think there's something almost more pathetic in that, because you're kind of burying your face in the sand maybe more than in the other categories in a more essential sense, because you're not just distracting yourself, you're kind of lying to yourself that this justifies your existence or gives purposeful, meaningful movement to your existence. And yet at the same time, it's the most grandiose and maybe the most addictive once you kind of become fixated on it or kind of con yourself into believing it. It becomes kind of the most addictive and maybe most helpful, because you do actually believe in the purpose of your existence towards making something better. There's always something better that you're sort of climbing towards, like a kind of ladder.
Right.
And your existence
It's almost like if you acknowledge everything that if you acknowledge the basic conditions he's taking as given, and then you say, oh, what is meaningful is that I'm going to make this into art, then you're sort of you're making the same mistake as everybody else, but you sort of ought to know better.
Yeah.
And maybe do know better and are sort of
or you think you know better. Yeah.
Right.
But it's a kind of high level of fooling.
Yeah, it's the Maurice Clement show, like voila, and now there's meaning again.
It's like they're fools, but you're like a holy fool in that sense, right? Like they're kind of like the common clowns, but you're the king's clown in that you're being silly, but you're also speaking truth to power. So there's like meaning there. While everyone else is just like an idiot. I think that's
I think the account you gave of your sense of your life's purpose, meaning, like, I think that's certainly very familiar to me, and I think to a whole lot of writers. I mean, this was a conversation I was having with Alice recently, and she pointed to some video that ContraPoints had made, where she was sort of confronting the claim that like, oh, well, it's just, being trans just a mental disorder, and isn't that just a delusion that you're committing yourself to? And her response, though it's sort of framed within multiple layers of quotation marks, but I tend to think this might be actually the correct response. Her response was, show me someone who isn't committing his life to a delusion. Like whatever it is, you're sort of, the way I've put this in the past to myself is like, well, you have to bet your life on something. Like you have to say, like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a pastor at this church. I guess that's what I am. And it's not just that I enjoy the Olympic sport that I do, or the hobby that I perform. It's that like in some sense I think that it's valuable and meaningful, and like some of the very most the like greatest, most powerful minds on earth devote themselves to playing chess, which is like should be ridiculous, but like we sort of decide, or like sports, like amazing acts of human grace are also taking place within a totally ridiculous and artificial framework. And so there may be, yeah, like I'm increasingly of the mind that like we're all simultaneously just like choosing which delusion to buy into, or maybe not choosing and just having it and just taking it as given.
Yeah, because I think like my father is like a kind of working class to now middle class man, is like very into football. And I
Mm-hmm.
think from kind of a young age I kind of watched football and thought like this is ridiculous. Why are you so impressed by like men kicking a ball around a field? Like I'm impressed by someone who can like evoke human experiences through words, right? And like this is
Right.
much more, this is a true sign of
Yeah.
human genius, and you're just watching
Yeah.
people kick a fucking ball. But
Yeah.
like, as the older you get, the more you realize that it's all kind of ridiculous. And like
Yeah.
the capacity for scorn is infinite, and you can scorn someone like dedicating their life to shoving a few characters around a page to make up imaginary people doing imaginary things for no actual point, no phenomenological actual point.
Yeah.
So all action there's certainly a sense of incompetence to all action. But I'm not sure, even as I admit this consciously, that I can really completely tear myself away from the kind of base belief that writing and poetry and art is kind of superior to football and has more meaning to humans. Like I can intellectualize that idea is ridiculous, but I think there is a kind of not subconscious, but certainly base level instinctual, but kind of belief I've clung to that it is superior. And I'm not sure that as I'm denying it, that I'm really giving it up, that I still don't have it somewhere deep down.
I think it's a question of more than one. It's not like it's non-linear ranking, right? Like I think if you want glory, excitement, awe, beauty in the moment, and like an intensity of feeling, then I think sports do win that contest. But if you want
Yeah.
another sort of power, and maybe one that I mean certainly one that endures longer, then other forms like poetry or art start to have some chances. And I think probably all of the things that we devote, I mean the same way that like devoting yourself to a religion, if we're going to assume all of these things are fundamentally meaningless, then I think you could still say that, like, well, maybe my own personal name and glory doesn't endure, but also like, the athlete gets to enjoy his glory, whereas like the poet, like this will be great when I'm dead, you know. And maybe like the person who devotes himself to a religious community is not going to experience personal glory in an immediate sense, or in a like have the satisfaction of thinking about his name being remembered after the fact, but is going to participate in a collective experience that's really rich, and in a kind of a different form of ecstasy that might, I don't think that it's easy to rank these things. And I don't mean that like every life pursuit is fundamentally equal. They're certainly not. But yeah, I think it may just be, I'm with you in that I can't convince myself that for me other things matter more than writing, but I sort of I'm both able to acknowledge that it doesn't matter, and I kind of can't stop devoting myself to it as if it matters. It's very much like free will. Like I'm pretty convinced that there isn't such a thing as free will, but it's almost a meaningless acknowledgement. Like I can't
Yeah.
actually think it and
Right.
feel it and do like it. I can kind of know it in some sense, but it's never gonna, it's the difference between saber and conocer.
Which is interesting to me because I'm thinking a lot about whether rationality is kind of the be all and end all. That is, if you can reason out why an experience is meaningless, or you can reason your way into one thing, but emotionally feel a different way, which is the, which one has greater value or superiority of kind of a true factor to it, the reasoning or the emotionality. Because I was talking to a friend about, and we can talk about it more specifically, but I was talking to a friend recently about ContraPoints, and we were talking about the whole sort of trans, anti-trans debate.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend was saying that like she couldn't face a kind of transphobe who was very, very like clever, who could like
Mm-hmm.
reason out all their arguments superior, like in a superior manner to her,
Right.
because at the base root, she just has trans friends. So
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
kind of simply believes psychologically and emotionally that trans people exist and like we should respect them, right? But like those emotional beliefs could be totally maybe disfigured by an incredibly rationalistic, intelligent transphobe, but it's the fact that she has trans friends that just makes her give meaning and value to believing in trans people more than reason and rationality. And maybe
Yeah.
this, on a very unrelated tangent, but maybe this comes back to the whole sort of football versus poetry and art. But maybe there's no superiority in like art having a greater value in longevity, but still you kind of feel it at a sort of lower level than rationality. And maybe that level, which I think is kind of associated with called mysticism, which is in one critic's definition, where sort of the dark flame of belief burns away logic. Maybe that's sort of the level where we are kind of more animalistic, almost instinctual, that surpasses, in a sense, the kind of the rational consciousness with all its kind of antler-like, I don't know, antler-like, irreducible, piercing uselessness.
Yeah. I think I am more resilient in the face of rational criticism of like of the devotions and beliefs and possibly delusions of my friends than of my own, because when it comes to my friends, like it's not hard for me to like think to myself sometimes like I'm not sure this is all it's cracked up to be, but then simultaneously say, well, like what, but like my personal loyalty and love is to this person, and so like it doesn't, like that's all I really need to worry about. Like the rational discussion is only going to really, I'm only going to start to have that uncomfortable squirming sensation that your friend is talking about when it's coming for the thing I'm devoted to. Because like that's the thing I can't be,
That's interesting.
that's the thing I can't sort of simultaneously shrug off and say like, oh, but I still love and respect Matthew and want like spending time with him, and I want to, like, he's my friend, and so I'm loyal to him no matter what. Like because I don't feel those things about myself, whereas I do about my friends. So like I think with the, yeah, with like trans friends, it's like my thought is almost like, well, I don't get it, but I don't really need to get it. Like I just love this person. I'm going to try to be good to this person, and like you know vote for being people that will help things be good for this person. Like that's all I really need to know about it, and then I can like intellectually examine it sort of independent of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for you, do you think once you feel loyal to a person, then that like you just vote for people who will help that person because of just the sheer power of that loyalty, or the fact that once you become loyal to that person, um, you kind of believe in their beliefs, right? So like if you feel loyal to a trans friend, are you
Yeah.
voting just because the government will help that friend in particular, as long as whatever other trans people there are, you vote for the pro-trans
Yeah.
choice or whatever? Or are you voting because through that friend you come to believe in the trans community as a group of people you want to help
Right.
out, right? Like there's two,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's these are two slightly different things, I guess.
They are. And like, I mean, that's what Vonnegut says, that basically like your friends are the people who agree to agree with you about everything. Like you sort of, you make friends with people, and like part of being friends, and in fact, sometimes the purpose of being friends is that you all sort of agree to see the world in the same way. And that like, that's certainly not always true, but I think you're right that there probably is more truth to it when it comes to the questions of individual condition and identity. And I certainly like am more aware of certain problems or questions because of people I know, and like my own experience has opened my eyes to certain ways of looking at, public policy questions that I might not have thought of otherwise. So I think like personal experience can open up considerations that weren't there before. But I also, I guess I don't find it that hard to sort of privately acknowledge that like we're all mostly sort of full of shit and deluding ourselves. But like, even so, I have my people that I care about and I'm going to be loyal to. And like that sort of, like in the same, like we've talked about, like there's, loyalty got a really bad rap under Donald Trump because of its, there are some obviously monstrous extreme manifestations of it. But, I tend to think that like, I don't want to live in a world in which people, frictionlessly sell out their friends and family, because it's like I sort of want people to have a feeling of being like, of sticking with their, not like sticking with their crowd or their tribe, but of having some sort of like being able to acknowledge that we're not pure creatures of reason. Like the argument about, and I don't think that this is a straightforward question. I think most times I've heard it discussed, it's done in a very stupid way. But like you will occasionally hear snotty liberals get real up in arms about public and private schools. And I know that means slightly different things in the UK than it does here. But like the argument will often take the form of like, oh, well, if the public schools in your area aren't that great, and you have the means to send your children to a private school where they're going to get a much better education, what you should still do is send your kids to the public school to get a worse education, because by being there and by your being involved in the school, you're going to help elevate the condition of the school for everybody else. And so that's sort of the right liberal thing to do, is to sacrifice your children's experience to the greater good of the experience of other children. And to me, like, there's not really a problem in saying like, yeah, like maybe the right thing to do in a utopia for society at large would be, if it's that simple a binary, and it isn't like our kids go to public school, but they're like good public schools. So like, it's not simple, but like, even if it were that simple, to me, I don't really have a problem saying like, okay, yeah, maybe that would be the right thing to do. And I'm definitely not going to do it. And like, I wouldn't actually expect someone else to do it, because my kids come first because they're mine. And like, I would expect you to say the same thing about your kids. And I sort of don't want to live in a world in which like all kids are fungible and like all spouses and friends are fungible. To me, like that we are very irrational and that we still sort of decide to throw our lot in with certain people feels like that's human experience.
I think that argument joins the many that are basically disproofs of the whole idea of utilitarianism. But yeah, no, I totally agree. I never heard that. I've heard a lot of arguments about private schools, but I never heard that one specifically. It's funny because in the UK private schools are also called public schools.
What is that? What does that mean? Why is that? I don't get it. What's going on with that?
I think it's because there's like a very specific type of extremely posh private school that's then kind of called a public school, that are kind of like ultra fucking private schools. So like Eton, Harrow.
Right. Because when people say like, oh, he's a public school boy, they're referring to those elite institutions.
Yeah, like ultra private school.
So what do you call a regular public school?
Like state school.
Ah, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Come on, UK. This is ridiculous.
Oh yeah. I haven't even gone to like comprehensive schools versus like academies and like selective schools, which aren't private school, but like, they test you. Yeah, it's
we have like magnet schools here, things like that. Yeah. Okay, so just to give the Zapfa its due, I do think like one of the things I find funniest in this article is that he really takes inventors to task. He's like really mad about inventors and explorers and scientists in general. And the argument I just think is like such hilarious logic is that by going around making all these discoveries, you're depriving other people of because he to be clear, he's not against all of these distractions and anchoring. Like he thinks like if that works for you, great. Like, because we need that. but
Yeah,
he
he's
says
trying his
like,
best to be descriptivist, not prescriptivist.
yeah. But then he says like, if you go around like spoiling all the surprises and publishing them for other people, then like, what are they going to distract themselves with? Like, we should all have to discover the laws of physics independently, because think of how much time it would take. Which I just think is wonderful. And then
Can
the
you imagine
title,
like what he thinks
yeah.
of like the internet? Like you just hate it.
Oh
Like,
God, yeah. You know, the
yeah.
internet. It's like it's a perfect, saturation machine, but it's also, yeah, it's spoiling all of the. I mean, maybe the internet, in a way, is the salvation of this like information age by like tainting all information with the possibility that it's made up, because there's no telling anymore. Um, the title of the piece, "The Last Messiah," comes from the very end, where he says basically like, there've been many messiahs who promised different kinds of salvation before. The sort of He imagines the last messiah, which will be the sort of the truest messiah in his vision, because life is a maladaptation, is a curse. Then will appear the man who, as the first of all, like the first man who had that existential crisis where his wife told him to go slay. Then will appear the man who, as the first of all, has dared strip his soul naked and submit it alive to the outmost thought of the lineage, the very idea of doom, a man who has fathomed life and its cosmic ground, and whose pain is the earth's collective pain. With what furious screams shall not mobs of all nations cry out for his thousandfold death, when, like a cloth, his voice encloses the globe, and the strange message has resounded for the first and last time. And he says a few things, but the heart of what he says is, there is one conquest and one crown, one redemption and one solution. This is the salvation he offers. Know yourselves, be infertile, and let the earth be silent after ye. So go extinct. And then of course he says like he'll be torn to pieces by the crowd of pacifier producers and midwives, the people who are the big birth, I guess, big labor and delivery will have him assassinated.
I feel like that was the worst point where he just was trying to imitate Vespa Zarathustra and then like just like switch around the point. Like that's so like faux Nietzschean. He
Yeah,
was trying to be faux biblical.
It felt a little bit like it was a kind of an anchoring maneuver for the essay. Like it needed a title, and it needed some kind of focus and closing punchline, but
Yeah.
didn't. But like it didn't feel. It felt a little bit contrived in a way that much of the rest of it did not.
Yeah.
It
was
is
like
an interesting like. I was going to say that like there are arguments I've heard for a long time. There's the Church of Euthanasia. I remember reading about. It's just like semi-joking anti-natalist group. And then there are plenty of groups that say like, well, humans should go extinct for the good of the earth. But his claim is like humans should go extinct for the good of humans. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything of worth, but yeah, no, that's true. I just feel like I don't know. It's like it's so Nietzschean. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I feel like he's kind of like saying, like, look, I'm not an analytical philosopher. I can be like Nietzsche, like I can be cool, but like I don't. It's just yeah, it comes off as hollow to me. I think, especially in the kind of Baroque style, like I don't know, there's something kind of almost life affirming and vitalistic in kind of writing in this such a Baroque biblical style. Like if all those sentences were kind of clipped down and crystalline and clinical, there'd be something almost truer to kind of the idea of going extinct or lifelessness than
Yeah.
there is in that kind of energetic, overlong, overwordy cry for extinction. Like there's sort of he's hating life and yet kind of celebrating the life impulse in the very language itself. And he just feels like he's kind of contradicting himself.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think he is missing maybe. I mean, setting aside like talent or whatever else, I think he may be missing part of what is Nietzsche's secret ingredient, which is that he really wants to and cares about and is really good at entertaining. And so like one big difference between this little pseudo biblical passage and what Nietzsche would have written is that Nietzsche's version would have been hilarious. Like Nietzsche's
Yeah.
devoted to the truth, but he also is is an artist and like wants it to be good, fun to read. Like he wants it to be cool and fun and funny and exciting and beautiful. And Zapfa is probably best when he's just being descriptive and analytical.
And it's up for like the whole Nietzsche just has his whole philosophy on his side. Like Nietzsche understands that like truth is in some sense there is no truth, there's only interpretations, as he says. So like when he comes to kind of his vitalistically entertaining style, he is expressing that as a kind of permutation on the idea that like life should be an aesthetic act of entertainment, right? But when Zapfa comes to it, he has all the tools against him. He's taken this whole like Nietzschean set of tools that's very suited to this kind of vitalistic impulse. He's trying to use this to like cancel out life, but he can't do it because all the tools are designed for a kind of like love of the illusion that Zapfa is against. So he's destroying himself even when he's trying to argue for himself.
Yeah, in a funny way, I think like maybe the better place to end the whole essay, and the place that would have been formally more coherent would have been when he says the present essay is a typical attempt at sublimation. Like when he sort of acknowledges that like, and that's where like, and if you were waiting for me to, you know, pull a rabbit out of a hat and show you the solution to this all, I'm not going to do it. There's no escape. That was this week's show. Thank you for listening. Do go check out The Secret Show, SLEERICKETS.substack.com, but also go check out, thanks for dropping by, Aaron's interview series with Alice Allen on this most recent, I don't know how often he does them, but this most recent installation is Alice. There is a link in the show notes. You can reach me as always at sleerickets@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.